and I do mean that sincerely. I'm 92 years old, and most of my life has been here in Stafford Springs, 58 years of it. I was born and raised in Oklahoma during the Great Depression under very, very difficult circumstances. Wonderful parents who taught me how to be a good human being, but also how to be strong and be persistent in whatever I was trying to achieve. And many times, the things I was trying to achieve while I was a prisoner of war was my life. I was on Bataan when Bataan fell. And Bataan fell because we ran completely out of all food, medical supplies. Ammunition was so low that we almost had none. We were surrendered by General King for humanitarian reasons. The Japanese treated us like animals, partially because there were so many of us, and many of us on the death march, which I did not make. I was in hospital number 2 at the time. Were just slaughtered by the Japanese on the death march. But I was in hospital number 2 because I had malaria so bad that I could not function. And they moved us from hospital number 2 to Bilibid prison, then by train to the Cabanatuan prison camp. And there we lost at least 30 men every day, at least that many. They were buried in mass graves. Many of them had no way of being identified, and they're still trying to identify them today. I was getting worse all the time with malaria again. And I heard about a person who had some quinine. And I went to see him. And I told him, I'm going to die unless I get some quinine. And he gave me enough quinine to cure my malaria and possibly at a risk to his own life. And that could be, and it is, one of the times that causes me to be here tonight. After my malaria was cleared, they asked for a detail, and I volunteered for it. And a friend of mine says, why in the world are you volunteering for a detail? I said, there's no place can be any worse than this place. And I went to the Davao Penal Colony. That's on the island of Mindanao. And it's quite a long distance from Luzon, or Manila, in that area. And I worked there in rice fields. It was formerly a prison, prison for Filipino prisoners. But it was abandoned by them, and the Japanese took it over as a prisoner of war camp. And there was about 2,000 of us there. Conditions improved greatly. Our health improved, and our death rate dropped greatly. But when in 1944, when the Allies were coming back, they started moving prisoners out And I was on a ship backed up into Manila, and I was on 2 different ships. Then I got to Manila, and I was placed on the ship that was called a Canadian Inventor. And we were on board that ship for 62 days, and it was total hell. You've heard of the hell ships. That was one of them. There's a question about how many of us died, but I do know about all the suffering that all of us went through. On September the 2nd, 1944, we docked in Moji, Japan. And we were offloaded there, put on trains, on a train rather I should say, and shipped to Yokkaichi, Japan. The ones that I was with. And it was went to work in a mill as slave laborers. And we worked there, very little food. The weather was starting to get cold. Practically no clothing. And we had an old Japanese man who was our boss, who brought his food in, and stupidly, my friend and I took his lunch and ate it. But instead of him saying anything to the authorities or to us, the next day he brought 2 lunches. He said, 1 for you and 1 for me. And he did that every day, every time that we worked with him. At the end of the war, after the 2 atomic bombs were dropped, and I'd been moved out of Yokkaichi at that time because of an earthquake that had destroyed the factory, and moved to a place called Toyama, Japan. But after our liberation and all, I flew out, was flown out of Japan. And I think I was the only plane out of that camp that plane load of us was the only ones that were flown out by plane, because my health was terrible at that time. We had no clothing, and we were all barefoot. And the pants that you see displayed out here are the pants that our camp commander, the American camp commander, had the Japanese find some clothing for us of some kind, because our clothes were just total rags. And the only things that the Japanese had at that time was just uniform pants. So we wore those pants, and we were all barefooted. And the hobnail shoes are the shoes that they gave us. We put them on, and we wore them till we got to where we could get some American uniforms or clothing. And that's what you see displayed out there. And every city, when I was flown out, was totally destroyed by incendiary bombs. Every city was destroyed by incendiary bombs. The total country was just an absolute mess. But 5 years after the war, I received a letter from the old man that gave us a lunch to share. But I never answered it. It wasn't out of bitterness or anything like that. Didn't have my life straightened out, and I was suffering with PTSD, as I suffer with now, but I know how to handle it. I received that letter, but never answered it. And received the opportunity to go to Japan on what they call a friendship visit, sponsored by the Japanese government. I would not have taken it unless she had encouraged me to do so. And we went. And I was very concerned about how I would act and how I would feel, what my emotions would be, what the country would look like, and a whole multitude of things I was concerned about. But we took the trip. It was top shelf trip. We went first class on everything. And we met and was able to talk to all kinds of people, and interviewed with all kinds of people. And I'll give you a few of them. On day one, we visited the British Commonwealth War Cemetery. This is similar to the tomb of the unknown soldier. It contains the ashes of men that died in hell ships, and they were cremated to protect it from the spread of disease. And they took us there so that we could have a ceremony for them in a way. And they took us in a very nice bus, minibus. We got off. Here's the Marines, big, strong, healthy people. Assisted us off of the bus. It was raining. Held their umbrellas over our heads. Took us to the cemetery and conducted a service, a military service. And they gave each of us a bouquet to place it at the memorial that they had where these urns were. And all of the names of the people that were there, the ashes were there, were placed above it where that we could see them. And it was a very moving thing for me. Very moving thing for me. Then from there we went back, and they always had lunch. And we did a few other things that day, and the next day we went and met with the Diet members. That's like our Congress, Senate here. And we had a chance to give a 3-minute speech. And you can say a lot in 3 minutes. I went over there to do exactly what the program said it was. Friendship. But I also wanted to bear in mind that we were friends in spite of the things that we had all gone through. Both countries. And that I felt that both countries could take pride in the way they are unified together and work together today. There's no conflicts whatsoever between the two that I know of. And it just was a nice way to handle it, and that's the way I handled it. And each of us had their own particular thing to say about it. And we had questions, and they answered it on it. And one of the questions was, but this, I'll go back again. When we arrived there, I'll come back to this, I noticed that the cleanliness, first of all, the city was just, total city was just immaculate. Every building is white. You look out at night, out of the windows of the hotel, and you'd think it was Christmas time. It was, the food was wonderful. Everything was wonderful. And, but one thing I did notice was, there's a uniformity of dress. There is a uniformity of a lot of things that almost places it in a military way, even though it may not be controlled by the military. But there are still just one nation, and they're that way, but they're very, very kind people, kind-hearted, and good people. And they were all very good to us. Our interpreters worked for the Japanese Department of Foreign Services. And they were fluent in languages. And the interviews that we had sometimes were difficult because it took so long for translation from one language to another. But they worked out, it worked out fine. But the third day, we had coffee with Ambassador Carolyn Kennedy at the ambassador's residence. Press conference at the Japanese National Club, and speeches at Temple University. Well, Carolyn Kennedy's residence is where the peace treaty was signed. It's where MacArthur's residence was until the United States took over. And the visit that we had there was very cordial. She was very friendly with everyone. Her staff was very friendly with everyone. And there was a colonel there, and he had slanted eyes, a United States colonel. And he and I were talking, and I said to him, "Are you Japanese?" And he said, "No, I'm American." But he said, "I'm from Korea, my family is." He said, "I went to West Point, I graduated from West Point, and this is where I am now." He's very cordial, very highly intelligent, but I think his answer to me was a good one. "No, I'm an American." And he and I talked for, half hour. The meeting lasted 2 hours. And she went around talking to all of us, and I mean, there wasn't anything rushed about it. It was just a casual, "How are you today, and what do you think of this, and what do you think of that?" And she got around to me, and she came over and sat down right on the couch beside me. And she says, "Are you enjoying your trip?" I said, "Yes, I am." she said, what do you think of Japan now? I said, I think it's really, really nice. I said, I noticed that the first night that we got here, when I sat down on a nice, warm toilet seat. And she just busted out laughing, and everybody else did too. And it was warm. They can adjust them to any heat that they want. And they have all there's a lot of things that they're really, you know, up to snuff on. But then a lot of our transportation was on the Bullet. That thing goes over 100 miles an hour. And it's just a fantastic piece of transportation. You got 2 minutes to get on.
1 minute.
No.
1 minute.
1 minute to get on. This is the way it was the whole trip. 1 minute. All right, we'll make it 1.5. But they got it when they're going to work. They get out. They have to get out in a certain amount of time, and I mean it's short. And it's like a hive of bees coming out of a nest. And everybody's dressed exactly the same. Same suits, same ties, and everything. They got a distinguished thing on it there, tells who they are, what they are, where they are. And I saw school kids getting off, same way. We're doing that here too, to a certain degree, and that's not all bad either. But then they have the sidewalks over there that are about as wide as a two-lane, half of a two-lane highway. And you see men and dressed in suits and ties riding bicycles to work. And I mean, they've scooped right along too. And then you see bicycles parked, 40, 50 bicycles parked in one place. Nobody, it didn't appear they locked any of them or anything like that. I don't know what the crime rate was over there.
They said virtually non-existent. Like I said, can I leave this bag in the bus?
They said, yeah.
Nobody will touch anything.
Nobody will touch anything. You lay it down, they never touch it. But the food, it was good. But sometime I thought I was going to eat something sweet, and it turned out not to be. But it was good. It was very good, and I mean it was top grade stuff. But we ate things that we wouldn't eat here, like snails and things like that. But it's tasty. The way they fix it. Then on the next day we took the bullet train to Nagoya, Japan, then a small train to Yokkaichi, Japan. That's the camp that I worked in, where the old man was that gave us a lunch. And I wanted to try to locate some member of his family and give them a letter in appreciation for the letter that he had sent me and an apology for not answering it. And the company that I worked for then, and the one that had been destroyed, by the earthquake is now a chemical factory, but it's owned by the same company, and it's huge. It has a subsidiary here in the United States. The president of the company came in, and all of his assistants, and they closed the factory one day out of the month, and that
One day a year in October.
one day out of the
year.
month in October, and they closed it in my honor on that day, the day that I was there. And I told him why I was there through an interpreter, and they started to get tears in their eyes. And after I got through talking and speaking to them, I had the two letters, and I offered them to him, and he came over and he kneeled down and right in front of me and took the two letters and apologized for what he had done, and what his company had done, some 65, 70 years ago. And that meant a lot to me. Then the next day, we went a bullet train from Nagoya to Osaka. We met with the management of the Natsu plant. We went by car to Kyoto. And I don't remember exactly what we did there.
We went to the plant where Mr. Costa was a laborer.
Yeah.
And they were not at all as kind as where my father was the laborer. They pretty much showed before and after pictures, what it looked like during the war, what it looked like now. They gave, at Ishihara, they gave my dad and the other two POWs that were with us beautiful fans as a gift. At the other factories, none of the other companies will admit or apologize for what they did during the war. They'll see the people and, you know, like, greet them, but they've never apologized. The company that he worked for is probably one of the best as far as admitting responsibility for what they did.
They built a monument in 1946, that's a year after the war ended, in honor of all the prisoners of war that did slave labor for them. And it was quite touching. And from day 6, we went to Temple Risen Kinnan, where we could view the last known copy of the mortuary records for all Allies that died while in captivity. Kyoto Museum for World Peace at Ratsumikan University. Now this place where they kept the mortuary records was, I don't know whether he started it or whether he just continued it and is maintaining it.
The monks have taken care of them since.
And he's a young man. He lived in Japan most of his life. He's Caucasian. He's either from Great Britain or Australia, I'm not sure. But he's highly, highly devoted to getting every record that he possibly can and keeping it in that shrine. And she asked me who I would like to look up. And I said, see if you can find Colonel Brady's name and Sergeant Burbank's. She found Colonel Brady's name, but she couldn't find Sergeant Burbank. And Colonel Brady was our regimental commander. And he was killed on a ship that was being sent to Japan. And he was a man that made records of our regiment under the threat of death of all of his men during all the time that he was at Cabana 1. And he tried to make a record of all of us. My name is on one of the records. In my book is one sheet, just with my name on it. But I have my whole company of records that he's kept. There's never been anyone to receive the Congressional Medal of Honor that was in prison camp. But you can rest assured that I'm going to work on it and try to get him the Congressional Medal of Honor. If there's any man that ever deserved it, he does. Because I know that there are many families that have looked at those records and know where their son died or what happened to him. And that is a priceless thing. They're now looking for people through DNA, and they'll bring a piece of bone home, and that gives them closure. This record that he kept gives them the same thing, and I'm getting away from my program. I'm talking about what I feel about this. And that's enough on the Museum of World Peace. And then last day was a kimono show at Nessian Textile Center. Well, they did a dance, and I got so excited I couldn't control myself. No, they were very good, though. They did a good show.
I'm taking pictures from up above, and there's my father.
Oh, she was, I tell you, she's limber as a limb, I'll tell you. She and we went to the biggest temple that they have in Tokyo, Kaiuchi Temple, but we didn't go through that. It's just too much walking, too far, you know. And I have one regret, and I can't change it. And this is what I tell veterans that I talk to. We all make mistakes. You can't change them, you just got to live with them, and I made a mistake. When I was at Yokkaichi and they were taking us for the tour, they stopped by the temple for their factory. It's like what you'd call a church here. And they told me, they said, we pray there every day before we go to work. Would you like to go in? I should have said yes, and I said no. It wouldn't have hurt me one bit to go in there. I wouldn't have been converted to anything, but I would have been paying respect to them for what they had done. And that upsets me. Then the last day that we were there, we had quite a taxi ride to the airport. And the gentleman who had been our interpreter throughout the whole thing, and I think he was the head of the whole situation, he went with us to the airport, just she and I. And he and I had a long conversation. We had an hour of talk, really good talk. And we talked about wildlife, and we talked about quite a few things. Then I said to him, I said, I am absolutely amazed at the way this country looks today. The wonderful things that you've done. Then I said, no, that we have done, you, your country, and my country, together to rebuild Japan to be the nation it is. And I said, you've done some wonderful things. You got a nice country. And I said, I hope this friendship will last forever. And I said that two atomic bombs killed thousands of people. But I said they saved millions. And he's looking at me. And I said, because I said they ended the war. I said, if the two atomic bombs had not been dropped, Japan would never have surrendered. Land forces would have to have killed millions more than what the two atomic bombs killed. And I said, crimes you committed against us and crimes you committed against other nations, you can't change. But I says, the friendships that we have now, I hope they will continue. And when he left us at the airport, he was crying. And overall, I think it was a very rewarding, emotional, educational trip. And flying out, I really had a little bit of a flashback, because the last time I flew out, the whole country was destroyed. And the time that I was flying out this time, you look out, you saw nothing but beautiful white buildings, countryside that looked nice and peaceful. Just a total contrast to what it was that I'd left some 65 years ago. And with that, I'll close. Thank you. Any questions?
Donna. Donna.
Mr. Stark, how, when you were a prisoner, or not a prisoner, but when you were in the mill, and I guess you were a prisoner working in the mill there, how did you know, how was everybody informed that the war was over? How did you know?
How were you informed that the war was over at the end of the war?
At the end of the war, I was in Toyama, Japan, because the factory in Yokaisha had been closed. And the end of the war, the whole, like I said before, all the cities were being bombed nightly, every night with incendiary bombs. And we knew that it was going to be over soon. Then when the end of the war came, the Japanese commander told our American commander inside of our camp that the war was over. And when he told him that, is when our camp commander, Colonel Thompson, told the Japanese commander, you get my people some clothes and you get them some more food. And the pair of the pants that you see out there and those shoes, that's when I received the clothes, the pants and shoes. Any other questions?
I do have another one. When you went to the mill and the owner apologized,
How'd that feel when they apologized?
Wait a minute, let her finish.
yes, when the owner apologized, and you had brought the letter, Now, was there any member of the family that that owner recognized or knew about?
Did they find anybody of Mr. Nakahara's family?
Not yet.
Oh.
They found someone that knew him.
They found a neighbor that lived next door to him back then, because we had a return address.
Oh.
But they're looking. And I trust entirely that they are trying to find someone, and I feel very confident that they will.
And they said that, I said, could we write to her? And they asked if they could go and see her, because she's like 89 years old, and rather than, and get permission from her. So they're gonna do that, and then our guide at the time said that if she'll correspond, I can send the letter to her, she'll translate it into Japanese and take care of the translations for it.
Did that man speak English when he was giving you the lunch?
Did Mr. Nakahara speak English?
No. No.
No, they learned Japanese, actually.
Watashi wa wakaru skoshi nepa. I understand a little bit of Japanese. Any other question?
Well, thank you so much, Mr. Stark, and I have some refreshments if you'd like to
Don't be
stay.
afraid to ask a question. You got a question,
Yeah,
ask.
you got any, you got any more questions?
What kept you going this whole time that you were prisoner of war and over in Japan? What kept you going from
When you were a POW, what kept you going?
Sometimes I don't know. It's a hard thing to answer. I think a lot of the things that kept me going was the thing that I told you when I first began my talk. The things my parents taught me. Don't give up. And we had quite a few that just gave up and died. Dying was easy. Dying was very easy. Living was hard, very hard. And now you're going to get me into another thing. Me fighting to live, I think has been about, I don't think any person in the world could be rewarded any more than I have been. When I was discharged, not discharged, when I was released from the hospital and put on duty at home, that's what they called it then, it wasn't leave. I met my wife, Judy. We were married for 67 years. I'll be 68 this Christmas Day. And we became engaged. And I came out here on October the 12th with the intention of marrying her and going back to California where my family lived. But I just fell in love with Connecticut. The foliage was beautiful. Her family was just absolutely wonderful. And like I said, I was suffering with PTSD and I was having a hard time. But she stuck with me. I used to have to get in the car and go out and park and literally talk to myself the way I'm talking right now and tell myself what I've got to do to straighten out. Then, couldn't hold a job, couldn't stand to work inside because it was too confining. I worked on the railroad for a while and loved it because I was moving around. But then they when trucks came in, they started laying people off, no seniority, I got laid off. But then I went to work for the American Screw Company in Willimantic, and they put me on as an apprentice tool and die maker. And I was an alcoholic too, at that time. And I came home and I told Judy, I said, I think I'm gonna be okay on this job. The very next day I come home, she said, Mr. Ford from the Veterans Service Center called, and he says he got a job for you. And I said, what? Deputy jailer, Tallinn Jail. I said, what's he, crazy? I just got out of a prison camp. She said, he told me that you would say that, but he wants you to call him anyhow. So I called him, and he said, Daryl, I think that's it. You should take that. And Judy wanted me to take it. So I took the job. And it was the best thing that ever happened to me. But this first of all, I got well, my father-in-law had already done it once, but I can go on all night about all the good things, but I'll continue with this. First of all, I was hit with the responsibility to fulfill a obligation to a person that recommended me for something. And I had to stick with it. And I straightened myself out. And I had inmates coming into jail who were suffering with PTSD, and nobody knew what PTSD was then. And I started counseling inmates on how to take care of their lives and straighten out. And you know what I was doing? I was talking to myself all the time. But I straightened a lot of people out, helped a lot of people along the way. And staying there at that jail was involved in so much stuff, it's unbelievable. The beginning of the communication system. 911 started there. The whole thing, and another thing, wonderful thing, when the county government went out and the state came in, the county had no benefits whatsoever. I'm talking about the wonderful life I've had. When the state took over, I figured that's it. But what the county, they took us, we would stay with the state, but the county bought, for me and my assistant, a retirement plan, retroactive to the date of employment, which gave equal to what correctional officers got. I started out with 18 years of retirement. I'd been at Tallinn Jail for 18 years. But being there helped me to handle my problems a lot better. No, it helped me to help my problems. Now I counsel in veterans. I'm going to counsel next Monday. I'm going down to Newington to counsel veterans. And this is all because of the kindness and goodness and faith that people have had in me and given me the obligation to fulfill that faith. Any other questions?
Judy, the letters the postcards that are in the case, that I think are from your grandparents?
Parents, right?
Your
His
dad's
parents,
right?
My grandparents, yes.
But they were, did they really know during the war where he was?
No. she's asking about the postcards from Mama and Papa in the case, but they didn't know, your parents didn't know where you were. They
No.
came from the Red Cross.
No, they didn't know where I was.
And it was,
The Japanese wouldn't allow us to communicate with anybody. Here's a funny one. No, it's not funny. I had never used a telephone in my life until after the end of World War II. And when I came back, the American Red Cross was trying to locate my family, and they were migrant workers. I had no clue where they lived or anything. I had an uncle who lived in Inglewood, California, and I had them get in touch with him, and he found out that they lived, and I told them that my parents lived in Shafter, California. They had moved to California. So the Red Cross called the Red Cross in Shafter. And the lady that was with me said, "You just hang on, they're going to get somebody in your family to a phone." So about a half hour later, the phone rang, and it was my mother. They brought her to the telephone, and that's the first time I ever used a telephone.
So you,
Now, Hope and I takes a ride, and she can find out where we are by punching a cell phone.
but the postcards, your dad never would have read them in Japan, because it says Japan on them.
He never got them.
But he never got them, right?
you got the card when you were in prison camp that they wrote you that one time, right?
I got the card after the war.
Oh.
I got that after the war. I never, well, no, wait a minute, no, I beg your pardon. No, I got the card one time in a Red Cross pack. Yes, that must be, yeah, that's right. Red Cross packages, I don't remember getting them very often, maybe once. But other guys seem to, but everybody, I can remember being in Yokkaichi, but can't remember the camp. I remember the camp in Toriyama, but can't remember the factory I was working in. And that's not uncommon. All of them are the same way. You have memory blanks. You have blanks in your memory about certain things. Any other questions?
When you were at the factory, did you have some sleep time at all? And where did you sleep?
When you worked in Yokkaichi, where did you sleep? Well, that's what he was saying. He can't remember the
Oh, you
camp.
can't- okay.
He can remember walking over a dike to get to the factory.
But I don't
from the camp.
remember the camp at all. I can't remember the camp. I remember walking to it, but the camp facility, no, I just don't. Toyama, I remember very well, but I don't remember the factory. Any other questions?
Do you still suffer from malaria, recurring bouts of malaria?
Do you ever suffer from recurring bouts of malaria?
No,
No.
no. Once you, it's not anything that really recurs. Once you get it cured, unless you get bit with a mosquito again,
On our
for
trip,
a long
though,
time.
2 of the gentlemen on our trip still suffer from beriberi.
Oh.
Oh, I had beriberi, I had yellow jaundice, I had dengue fever, I had just about every tropical disease you can think of. We all did at one time, yeah. Any other questions? Well, thank you, and it's been a pleasure to talk to my family.
Okay. We have all of his medals.
Yeah. I'll see you Saturday. Yes. I said you can tell your dad I said hi. Take care. Bye. See you. Bye-bye.
And,
Jane, I haven't seen you in a while.
Where you been?
We're gonna come back to Florida. I know.
I just
Things
told
are
her.
really hectic.
I said, I'll go once a year. I know.
and that's the Shanghai Cup he was awarded. Wow. Shanghai Cup has only been given to,
A lot of people don't have insurance.
No,
I know, that's not what they used to be.
no, it's not. There's always something else that you can pay for. All right, behave yourself.
America's Bravest.
How you doing? I hope those are healthy. Are those healthy?
Amy, he always gives a good presentation, doesn't he?
Oh, yeah, he did a good job. I don't know how he does it at 92.
I know, he's amazing.